And next up, we have David Bray. David is the inaugural director of the Geotech Center at the Atlantic Council. Hey, David, great to see you.
Great to see you as well, Hunter.
Welcome to the program and welcome to the summit. We're so excited to have you here today. Wow, so much has changed just in the last few weeks here, coming into 2021. We talked about the uncertainty potentially with the new administration coming into town. When you think about where we are today in this global geotech landscape, right? The global geo resource landscape, the global political landscape. What really matters right now? What's important?
So I think there's really three things we need to be focusing on, and that impacts what CIOs do, CISOs do, and CTOs, which is first, it's all about getting people back to work. The good news is we have some vaccines, and we expect to have more vaccines come out for COVID-19. Unfortunately, they're not widely available yet to everybody, but getting them out and being widely available to everyone. And then what does that look like in terms of making sure your employees have gotten the vaccines and that they're able to come back to work? And I think that then leads to maybe not everyone's going to come back to work the way they used to in 2019. We may see a very fundamental change in the nature of work. But I think for companies in particular, thinking about how do you make sure folks get the vaccines? How do you track that? How do you manage the privacy associated with the fact that I did get a vaccine, but maybe I need to reveal it so that I can actually come back to work and you can have a safe working place? That's number one. Number two, talking about sort of the changing geoeconomic and geopolitical landscape, we do have a new administration, and they are going to clearly do something regards to data and tech. It still remains to be seen what that looks like. We are still awaiting for confirmation of the director of the Office of Management and Budget. From there will flow probably announcements about who the chief technology officer is for the federal government, who is the chief information officer for the federal government, which will obviously have ripples throughout what the administration does. But what I would be tracking if I was a CIO or CISO right now or CTO, it really is this a case where they're going to engage and they demonstrate that they want to have sort of a positive relationship where they're building bridges, the idea of self-regulation when it comes to AI or data or other issues? Or are we actually going to see that there's actually going to be some formal attempts at possibly regulations? We already saw, for example, with the social media platforms, and they did take actions leading up to the inauguration, where obviously some people were just deplatformed. Parler was kicked off of Amazon Web Services. This raises a question of what does 2021 onwards look like for the interactions between the public, government, and tech? And I'd be watching that as a private sector CIO. The third thing, the tensions between the United States and China haven't gone away. They're still there. Early indications are the new administration is not going to change the stance that they have with China. But I think being aware that there are trade conflicts, if not trade wars, if we don't want to call them that. There are conflicts going on between China and the United States. That obviously has implications. Solar winds happened. We believe that was from Russian origin, and that actually impacted it, not just the government, but several private sector organizations. And then on a positive note, Europe saying that they want to enter into a trade and data alliance with the United States. There's going to be massive impacts as nation states and the actions that they do impact private sector companies.
You know, when you think about just the recent actions over the past weekend by the Chinese government to sanction a half a dozen of the former administration's executives, that really wasn't an attack on them. It was really a shot across the bow for the new administration.
It was a shot across the bow, and it's unclear as to, is that just trying to raise the stakes so that when China and the United States come to the table and talk about where do we go from here, they have like sort of like, well, we've got this and you've got this, maybe we can mutually agree to raise down. Maybe it's part of a bargaining tactic. Maybe they think that in some respects it might actually indicate that we're on your side, that we were not happy with the past administration. I'm not exactly sure what mental calculus was going on in there, but it does demonstrate that you see governments, both domestically as well as internationally, having impact on tech companies, and then similarly what tech companies do having impact on governments.
David, taking a step back to our land, our government in DC, is the House and Senate truly up to squaring off against big tech like the European folks have done so successfully and actually levied billion-dollar fines against big tech?
Well, it's going to be an interesting question about what actually gets done. And I think you're going to see, again, don't have a perfect crystal ball, but we should recognize that within the Democratic Party, there's both centralist Democrats as well as ones that are more progressive. And there really is a tension between them where the centralists say, we'd like to see what tech can do in terms of self-regulation, recognizing this is part of an industrial base of our country, which was a little bit different in Europe. I mean, they were taxing companies that were not their industrial base. There's a tension there, but then there's other ones that say, look, we've had enough is enough, that something needs to be done. You hear some cries to break things up. I think the question that we have to ask is, well, where does that lead? I mean, if we ended up with smaller companies, wouldn't they just reassemble very similar to what we saw with the telecommunications company, where they eventually all came back together again? I think what we really need to think about is, what is the role of tech in terms of both shaping the business marketplace, but ultimately what it should also be is a conversation about making sure there are benefits to the public that accrue and to the commons. And I think if we look at the last decade, of 2010 to 2020, there was at least a perception that tech companies had a lot of benefits and value accrue to them and maybe the business marketplace without similar gains in the social and social commons space. And I think if I was a tech company right now that was trying to think about how I could navigate a future that helps with my business interests, but also helps the United States and the world, I would want to be very proactive in conversations about how we can do tech for good that's also aligned with the businesses of the market.
But it really pre-assumes that the tech companies want to be noble and open and transparent and courageous and caring to do the right thing.
Well, and I think I recognize at the end of the day, tech companies and data companies are responsible to their shareholders, and shareholders are, of course, looking for increases in value. But I think what we're seeing, interesting enough, and it seems to be slightly a seismic shift, not just generational, but just over time. Companies that focus on sustainability, that focus on doing the right thing for the planet and environmental contributions, their stocks actually outperform those that don't. And so the business case could be made that by being noble and thinking about social good, you also elevate your stock price. And I think we see that with sustainability and environmental goals. Could we do the same thing that says, let's think about tech as almost like being the digital environment in which we contribute, data being the digital environment that we contribute. And so if I was a CIO, I'd be thinking about opportunities to approach my CEO, my leadership, my board, and say, here's how we can actually use tech for a noble end that at the end of the day, at least the data shows, companies that do that actually have outsized stock increases for the ones that are publicly traded.
Hey, David, proud to say we always look to reinvent HMG here in our global platform. We're launching a Global Leadership Institute, and we'd love to have you as an executive in residence. More on that down the road. But this week, there's news, right? Davos is digital. Davos, I think, just launched this morning. I saw a few news clips across the Atlantic from Davos. What do you expect to hear from the world's leaders who are getting together this week in Davos?
I think, yeah, exactly. Things are interesting. We're now at the page where things are virtual, and then as people start getting vaccinations, it's going to become hybrid plus virtual, and that's going to be a very interesting space for events. And always happy to help with anything you need, Hunter, because I really have a respect for HMG. In terms of what I would see being talked about at virtual Davos, it really is about how do we get everyone back on their feet after COVID-19? How do we prevent, there's some people that say the great news is the stock market's doing great, but it's unclear, is that artificially propped up? Is it something that will be able to continue, or have these efforts at government stimulus, not just the United States, but around the world, flooded it with so much money right now that we're due for another reset or economic, I dare to say, crash? I'm sure they're going to be mindful of making sure that we want to keep things going up. And then most importantly, on the economic front, thinking about how data and tech both increase productivity, but have outsized benefits to certain groups. I mean, for example, with COVID-19, the ability to work remotely, to be able to collaborate digitally, that helped knowledge workers. But other people that were, say, in the restaurant industry or other industries where they had to show up in person did not see the same benefit. And so we risk having an increasing divide between those that are able to work digitally and those who are not. I hope that leaders around the world, including the United States, are talking about how can we make sure that all boats rise, and we actually figure out how we can use technology to actually help those who did not see the same benefits during the COVID-19 pandemic.
David, great to see you. Thanks so much for coming on the program and being part of the summit.
Thank you as always, Hunter, and thanks to all the people out there. Please be bold, please be brave, and please be benevolent for the future ahead.
Awesome.